I'm Wahneema Lubiano, and I'm going to welcome you, and then Mark is going to say more words, but I'm going to briefly introduce the panel. So we have Angel Harris, who's professor of sociology and African American studies here at Duke, and co-director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Inequality. Harris is a specialist on educational policy. He's the author of 2 books, Kids Don't Want to Fail, which refutes the notion that there is Black oppositionality to academic school success, and The Broken Compass, which focuses on the question of parental involvement. To my immediate right is Mark Anthony Neal, professor of African and African American studies at Duke, and is a scholar of American cultural and gender studies and popular culture studies. He's interested in representations and images of Black men's masculinity. His most recent book is Looking for Leroy, Illegible Black Masculinities. Man, you can tell I grew up in the United States. Timothy Tyson, who is not with us just yet, but should be any moment, is a historian and a visiting professor of American Christianity and Southern culture at Duke. He's the author of a biography of Black freedom fighter Robert F. Williams and a memoir and account of the killing of Henry Morrow in Oxford, North Carolina in 1970, entitled Blood Done Sign My Name, published in 2004, which became a feature-length film. And he's also co-edited a volume with David Seselski, Democracy Betrayed, an examination of the Wilmington riot. And then a little bit further down the table to the right of Angel Harris is Brenda Reddick-Smalls, Associate Professor of Law at North Carolina Central University. A litigator for the past 30 years, she's worked in the areas of juvenile law, education law, voting rights, education law, and its relationship to civil liberties, primarily in South Carolina. She's the 1993 recipient of the Modjeska Simpkins Flame of Justice Award. She and Rhonda Sharp, research director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Equality, are working on a project that will measure racial disparities in law school outcomes. And to Brenda's right is Irving Joyner, professor at North Carolina Central University School of Law and the author of Criminal Procedure in North Carolina, now in the 3rd edition. A magisterial instructor, he's an expert on legal education. In 2004, he was honored as Lawyer of the Year by the George H. White Bar Association. He is past recipient of the Lawyer of the Year Award given by the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers, and he is the 2006 Professor of the Year designated by the NCCU law students. His ongoing project with his students, long-term, focuses on intergenerational damages of the Wilmington riot. And I am, Associate Professor of African and African American Studies and Literature, and Associate Chair of AAAS. And someone says I'm a moral voice, I take issue with that. She is the principal investigator for the NEH grant on African American literature and social history, which supported a summer institute for high school teachers this year. Her areas of research are race studies and critical theory, justice, and over-incarceration. So we're going to just run the table from my right.
But before we get started, though, most of you, this is the first time that you've ever been in this space. This literally is a brand new spanking space known as the Forum for Publics and Scholars, which is co-convened with Laurent Dubois in the back and myself and several other scholars. And this is a space that we're hoping that folks will do more of this kind of opportunity. In the best case scenario, it will be a space to have conversations that intervene in immediate conversations around critical issues in our life and our culture and our world. There will be a full production studio that will be here at some point, so folks will be able to produce many shows, to do Skype interviews and a range of things. But we're really hoping that this will be a space that will be a gathering for folks who are very interested in having some sort of public discourse around the issues that affect us as scholars, to be able to do that kind of work here. A couple other quick things for those of you who might be on social media, in particular Twitter, and would like to tweet tonight's conversation, which is being streamed live and which we encourage you to tweet. You can follow and use the hashtag Duke, NDRD, as in short for National Dialogue on Race Day. For the hashtag, you can follow the Scholars in Public's forum, or the Forum for Scholars in Public, at DukeSP_Salon. And we'll start with Professor Joyner.
And what about Tufts? Do we want to mention Tufts? Okay.
All right, thank you, Professor Neal, for that. I want to thank Solidarity for the invitation to participate in this discussion, one that is obviously timely. But anytime you talk about race, it's timely, since very few people want to talk about it. And the seriousness of it is one that is often suspect. I think it's timely in terms of the 50th year anniversary of the March on Washington. We gathered in Washington last week on two separate days for different reasons to commemorate what happened in 1963. And I guess to measure the race relation as it is present today versus 1963. In 1963, race relations was bad. In 2013, racial relations is bad. It is as bad now as it was then. Materially, there are differences in the depth of the problem, but for African Americans and racial minorities, there is no significant difference for the people at the bottom. For those who have been able to profit from the civil rights struggle, probably better defined as the Black Power struggle, where some people were able to be chosen to elevate themselves up the ladder and become what we would, I guess, look at as representatives of the race within certain areas of interaction, it has improved. But for the vast majority of African Americans and other racial minorities, it is as bad now as it was then. One of the issues raised in 1963 was that of segregation, and just how deprived racial minorities were as a result of de jure and de facto segregation. We find in 2013 that a lot of the de jure segregation is gone, and I said a lot of it because some of it still exists, operating under code names other than race. And clearly de facto segregation is as bad today as it was then, although there's always room for the tokens to be in to make the picture look bright. But again, when you look at what is happening with our children in schools, the school to prison pipeline is very significant. It is one that has continued from 1963 until today. In fact, when you look at education, the height of educational opportunities for African Americans was during segregation, when African Americans had their own schools, their own teachers, their own principals, developed their own curriculum, and taught African American children to deal with the racism that they were going to confront in society. I recall that when you look at graduation rates from 1940, 1950, 1960 in segregated schools, you found that roughly 95% of every student in those schools graduated and were prepared to deal with the society in which they were introduced to at the time. And if you look at from 1972, and I'm focusing more on North Carolina now, from 1972 forward, the achievement rate for African Americans has steadily gone down. Each year it gets worse and worse and worse. in a system where we say that the teachers are better educated than they were before, that facilities are better than they've ever been before, that technology is better than it's ever been before, except that at the bottom of the podium you find us now, just like, unlike you found us then, because those African Americans who graduated from those segregated schools, who you now look at as giants, Julius Chambers, Thurgood Marshall, all went to and graduated from segregated schools. They were able to bust out and through the discrimination and segregation which they faced. Economically, the situation is just as bad. People make the distinction between race and class. I don't think there is a real distinction between, because one is no more than a code word for the other, but for racial minorities, it is as bad then as it is bad then as it is now. The unemployment rate among racial minorities is probably anywhere from 2 to 3 times as high as it is for whites, and it's no accident. It didn't happen by happenstance. It didn't happen because African Americans and racial minorities aren't prepared or can't be prepared to deal with that. It happened because there is an intrinsic racism that pervades all of our institutions, and to keep racial minorities down. And I think that what we find ourselves in today, I've been involved in the legal defense of all of the Moral Monday people and putting together all of those demonstrations in which we have 960 some odd people who have been arrested to protest the very same thing that I'm talking about. The irony of all of that is 90% of those people were white who were arrested and who came out to be witnesses to their opposition to what the North Carolina General Assembly was doing. But what we found is that on the other side, those people who mean us no good, they are more emboldened now to speak out against our interests and to fight against our interests and to legislate against our interests. And they're very adept now at using our language to disguise what it is that they are doing. It is really ironic, that in the middle of the effort to suppress the rights of voters in this state, that they would dare use the words of Martin Luther King and others to talk about "we shall overcome" when they are seeking to overcome us and not allowing us to overcome the adversities which they have established. So I'm going to stop there and move on, and then we can get into some dialogue about that.
Okay. My name is Brenda Reddick-Smalls, and I have a hyphenated last name. And I recall that when I first began to practice in South Carolina, a judge leaned across the bench and said to me, "I can't pronounce that, and I ain't going to pronounce that. And if you want your client to get some hearing today, I suspect you better move on." And I say that in, kind of a jocular way, but to say that I grew up in a time when segregation was real, very real. I was born and raised in Monroe, Louisiana. My father was a civil rights fighter, activist, when they outlawed the NAACP. And so if you study any of the history books, you will realize that at the same time they were outlawing the NAACP by making it illegal to join, and you lost your state job, they were also outlawing communist infiltrated organizations. And I start my little spiel tonight with that because I think race is intricately involved with the economics of the country where we live. And when we were, and when I say we, people of color, poor indentured whites, Asians, and even the Hispanics that the United States fought a war to take their land, when we were separate from each other, and we were able to be used as commodities, the repressive laws allowed it and pushed it and furthered it. And every time a group climbed up or moved or shifted its position, then you have a case of, and I always say this, the haves and the have-nots. And so we, in this country, I chuckle at it, and I laugh at when they talk about bootstrapping and not enough money and welfare mentality, and we're changing the laws. And I wonder how many of us as Americans actually know our history. Right? So if you look at the history for even a place like Durham, you will understand that there were women who were pushing for the civil rights movement along with labor unions that were ultimately co-opted. And so at every juncture, you will see where labor, money, power, race always intersect. And so I began a career as a lawyer thinking I'm going to be a civil rights lawyer, and I'm going to represent people in a place where they don't even call my name. That should be a book. They won't even call my name, right? They won't even call my name, right? And the name is power, so obviously there were many, many, many small fights. But I began as a civil rights lawyer because that was the legacy, and that's the story of race in this country. Our legacy is not known. 1963 did not begin the civil rights movement. You can go back to A. Philip Randolph and the Union cars. You can move all the way back to even past Elijah Muhammad and whatever you think of that movement, to a movement back to Marcus Garvey, all the way back. Our history is never told. And so each generation gets a piece, and we start out, and I started out as a girl in South Carolina, not realizing that when I took contracts and fought for consumer issues and repossessing trucks from farmers by companies that really didn't expect them to keep it, that it was a civil rights issue. And so for me, I've come full circle. Someone gave out the number of years I practiced law. I'm going to get Sandy for that, okay? There must be a day of reckoning. So now as a lawyer, I have to ask you the questions, all right? As I practice, I crawled from representing, consumer issues all the way up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, where I did fight voting rights cases, and I did things, and we see the same things again here. So I have to ask you, that this is my time, so I get to do it. Why are you here? Why did you come? Yes, ma'am. You with the silver necklace. Why did you? I'm a lawyer. I get to do this, okay? Why did you come here today?
In part because I'm fascinated by the Scholars in Public concept that's starting here, in part because I'm fascinated by all of you, and in part because I grew up in an incredibly white environment, and I'm trying to figure out what I don't know in this world that I was never exposed to. And so I'm trying to learn some of the things that I've not been exposed to before.
Young lady in the orange shirt, should that be our burden to teach her? Yes, ma'am, I'm talking to you. I teach. I can do that also. I can do that, okay? Should that be our burden? Or is it a burden that we should?
It is a burden. It is a burden. Should it be our burden? I don't think so. But I think that the fact that she's here is a good thing. I think that the fact that there are books available for her, for you to read and get access and learn about, I think that that's good. But at the same time, I don't feel like I do feel like it's a burden always to be like, so that I always have to justify or explain or over-explain to my white counterparts, like what it is like to be a black woman in, doing scholarship, doing research.
So let me stop you. Why is that a burden?
It's a burden because it's at some point it becomes, the way I've heard it explained, when you talk about like racial battle fatigue, like you're always in the trenches, and so that can become burdensome. And so there's a moment where I just need a break and then get back to the fight. And so when I always have to justify, I always have to explain, sometimes that's heavy. Sometimes I'm tired.
So the young man sitting here, and yes, you're younger than me, so yes, you are a young man. But don't you carry that every time you walk down the street? Do you consider it a burden that you're black first before you're a man, before you, what is your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Glenn.
Glenn. Before you're Glenn, you are a black man?
I don't know if that I consider it to be a burden. I understand that it's an issue that race in general is a topic that just needs further discussion. And I think that, going back to your original question, and I'll address your second question in a moment, the reason I'm here is to gain a deeper understanding of sort of an intergenerational approach to race, right? Like, I'm 29 years old, and my understanding of race is going to be different, potentially, than your understanding of race. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and I can't say that my experience with race is similar to my grandmother who grew up in DeKalb, Mississippi. Very different. My interactions with individuals of various races is different. So again, on one hand, it's a desire for me to gain a deeper understanding from an intergenerational approach. And I think secondly, hopefully I'm here to glean from these scholars and from you as practitioners and scholars as we more deeply engage race. I think that race is a topic that we are very uncomfortable about discussing, and it's something that we should be much more comfortable about discussing, but those environments and that environment should be made available, and the space should be made available. I don't think that many spaces exist where race can be discussed in a very safe and open way.
But aren't you asking for the same thing she's asking for? Just a different flavor.
Perhaps. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But again, as I think that we all desire to understand race, and I don't think that any of us have a monopoly on truth. I don't think that just because I'm a black man who grew up in, urban city America, that I have the perspective on race. I think that there are several. So I think that this environment, as Professor Neal just mentioned, hopefully will provide that space where we can discuss race. There's no homogeneous or one-sided monotonic approach to race. I think there are several that should be brought to bear.
So the gentleman in the blue shirt, is this authentic? Everyone here is to learn something. Is this an authentic discussion on race, or is this a feel-good because everybody here has the same sort of liberal ethos? Is this authentic?
Not sure what authentic means in this context.
Your definition of authentic, whatever that is. God, I was good in the courtroom. I gave it. Just plain. Go ahead. Is it authentic?
I assume that the members of the panel are saying things and describing things that they feel and believe in, and have thought a lot about, and that there's authenticity in terms of their sincerity in what they're saying.
But this is a safe environment, and race does not occur in a safe environment. When you walk in a courtroom in South Carolina, you're not in a safe environment. If you bring up race, and race is an issue, is that more authentic than our discussion or our dialogue? I just do you a softball. I just do you, I call it in class, I just do you. Of course, you would answer, of course not. One is not more authentic. But let me yield the mic. There are many interesting issues about race, and I am certainly not a scholar. I'm a practitioner. I teach law school. Even if I wanted to get away from race, obviously I could not. It's passion. So I appreciate you all being here, whatever your motive is. Thanks.